Hey there, fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and what's that thing in the corner? Oh, it's my other camera because it's a tutorial day. We're making landscape reflections, these, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. Stick around. So whether you're painting a lake, a river, or an ocean, there's a lot of different approaches to how to paint reflections for landscapes. Now today I'm going to show you how I personally approach it for my particular style of painting. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is the only way to do it, but I think it's a really effective way for painters of any style or skill level to pick up on a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about today. Now if you've never seen one of my tutorials before, I want to make note that I am using one, really highly saturated colors because that's how I paint, and two, I'm doing this again based on how I work and how I would approach it. This is not necessarily the only way to do this, and please don't take everything I say as you have to do it this way. There are other artists out there, other people are going to suggest different things, but this is how I would approach it, so that's, for me, how I think is the easiest way for you guys to approach it. Okay, all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Record one. Okay, so to start things off, I've got a piece of regular old cotton duck canvas primed and stapled down to a couple of pieces of cardboard to make it similar to what you might get out of a standard canvas board. My brushes for today are going to be a long-handled round and a bright. Probably not going to rely on these a ton. Going to be relying a lot more on my short-handled flat. This is technically a watercolor brush, but it works really, really well for acrylics, so I've been using it a ton over the years. And eventually a liner brush for some other details later. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my tutorials, one thing I do a lot is I will slide my painting surface over to the side, and over in the lower right-hand side, you're going to see my palette cam. The palette cam is going to show you my colors for today, as well as what I'm doing with my mixing with water, when I'm reaching for things, and everything like that. On my palette today, I've got some phthalo blue green shade, cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow medium, titanium white, eventually some sap green, but not currently, it's not sitting out. And then I also have sort of my used paint gray. When I'm done with a painting, I stick everything in this jar. It comes out to this nice, nasty gray color, and it makes for a nice base color for a lot of the stuff I'm doing as I work. Also, it's going to be periodically working back and forth with my regular old rag. That's going to sit over here as well. Although you're probably not going to see a ton of that between that and the palette cam and everything else. Not going to be the most important thing to look at, but it is important for me to have it there. So when it comes to painting reflections specifically for landscapes, one thing you'll notice if you do it a lot, or whether or not you're used to it, or if you are just trying it for the first time, is that it's deceptively difficult. Now it can be easy if you know what you're doing, which I suppose could be said for just about anything, but with reflections, it's really easy to overthink it, to make it muddy, to try and fix your mistakes and things like that. So you can very easily make something that starts out looking okay and then looks worse and worse and worse and worse the more you try to fix it. So I've laid out a couple of compositions here today, just in pencil sketch. You can probably just barely see them on camera. So I'm going to do a simple mountainous lake Bob Rossi kind of thing with my one on the left, just to kind of give you some basic techniques. And the one on the right, I'm going to have a little bit more fun with and use the techniques from the first one and take them a little bit to the next level. So to start things off, I'm just going to wet my brush and grab, basically make a sky color here. So I'm going to grab some of that blue and some white. Blue is a lot higher tinting of a color than the white, so I would definitely need a little bit more white. I'm putting that there. I'm going to start off just by making a simple blue sky here. And what we're going to do is basically replicate that back and forth by making that reflection. A lot of people want to paint the whole upper section and then try to replicate that in the reflection. And that's a lot harder to do and a lot less effective in the long run. So ideally what you want to do is actually just paint both sections as two paintings at the same time. So I'm just going to go ahead and start laying out this color. And I've already got a tutorial on how to paint a blue sky here on this channel, so I'm not going to go over that technique twice. Also would like to try to keep this tutorial under a certain period of time, preferably under 40 minutes, but not sure what's going to happen there. So same thing I'm doing here, I'm going to do on the bottom. And just match those strokes, essentially. The blue sky, I slowly work my way to a white. I'm leaning a little bit on my water today since this is first coat, and I'm trying to do this all in one layer, or at least close to all in one layer. Now, the closer you work to the horizon with any kind of thing, with any kind of landscape, you're going to get it lighter. Now, that's going to distort a little bit. It's not going to be straight down to white and then straight up from white. Here, it's going to distort. It's going to be a little bit off. So you want to account for that as you start working on that. So I'm going to add a little bit extra of this middle layer here, because I know not all of that's going to translate straight down into the lake. And I've got a video, I put a fairly bigger tutorial up a couple of months ago, I think, at least from the time that this got uploaded, about blending and layering with acrylics. So a lot of that stuff from that tutorial is going to make more sense if you've seen it. If you have not, I would definitely recommend checking that out. Yeah, if you're doing anything with water, especially whether it be a lake or a river or whatever, replicate your sky first. It's going to make everything way easier. Because even if I'm coming in, and let's say that my water is just going to be a river. It's going to be a tiny little thing going through. If you just paint over that area, you can come back in and then paint over it with your darks and make that river. And just that section will be light, but it'll already reflect your sky. So that's really, really important. Okay, I'm going to grab my funny dark color. Maybe mix a little bit of blue into that just to keep it kind of toned down. And I'm going to make myself a mountain. Now, because my paint's still wet here, I'll be pulling a little bit of color out. Doing this, normally if it was me on a much larger scale of painting, I would let this dry first, but that's more personal preference for me. So this is the same old flat brush. And I'm just going to go make a stroke, start edge of that mountain. Now, one thing a lot of people want to do when making reflections is do the whole mountain, detail it, everything, and then try to paint with reflection. Don't do that. Just like we did with the sky, paint one side, paint the other side. Now, the other thing someone will say is, like, oh, I'm just going to try and match that shape. And you can do that. Takes a lot more practice, and it takes a lot more control over your hand. If you're not used to doing that, I don't recommend it. I would recommend, though, flipping your canvas over and then matching your shape a lot easier with the exact same brush stroke you just made, and take that right down to the horizon. So if you remembered exactly what you did here, all you got to do is just repeat that and do it right there. Of course, I'm missing my point a little bit here. There we go. Up and down, matching those shapes. Oh, hello. And that's one of the easiest ways to do reflections, just to flip the canvas back and forth, back and forth. Make a little bit more in here. Get a little more water. My paint's not flowing as much as it should. And this is also just a base coat, so I'm not really worried about it being too transparent. Get that big up shape going up and around. Paint that down to my horizon line. And flip it over. Down. Got that peak about there. Up and down and in. And of course, at this point, we're looking at fairly clear mirror reflections. Now, if you want to work fast enough, and I recommend that you do, to some degree. So now we've got that mountain in there. Now, The paint's still wet here, and that's good, especially for acrylics. Because from here, we can take another brush. I'm going to actually take my, my other flat here. These bristles are a little stiffer than what I'd personally use, but then you can take that brush and then distort that shape. That way you're thinking, okay, the water's not perfectly still and calm, because a lot of times if it is like that, and even if it is like that, you're still going to get ripples in the water. So roll just a couple selective ripples in that. So you've kept the shape, but you added the ripples. And the ripples are really one of those things that can totally go overboard. So you gotta do a couple of motions and then just stop. It's really, really easy to want to just, oh, I'm just gonna keep going, keep landing. No, 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 stop it. Less is more. 9 times out of 10 painting, less is more. So you can build that basic shape in like that. I'm actually gonna throw, I think, a couple of rocks in here as well. So I'm gonna put one there. Maybe put one over here. Why not? Put a bigger one right there. Now, one thing Bob Ross did a lot, and you can do this, especially when the shape is smaller, or if you're working small enough scale, or with something like oil paint where you have the luxury of doing this, you don't have to worry about it drying, is taking that paint and just pulling it down. Now, that's a little bit less effective, at least with acrylics, because it doesn't capture the same shape, but you can then blend that out a lot easier. But personally, I prefer to actually just rework that shape in, whether I'm flipping the canvas or not, and then pulling that out just gently, usually with the corner of the brush. And I'm leaving a little bit of distortion right where those two pieces meet. Same with the mountain in the back, same with the mountain in the front, or the rock in the front, rather. And I will show you why later. It's going to be really important, because a lot of times you're like, okay, what do I do with that? What do I do with the point where they meet? We're going to hold off on that for a minute. All right. So paint's wetter than I'd like it to be, but I do want to work a little bit of a green together. And you know what? Screw it. I'm not using the sap green. I'm just going to make a green because it's easier, especially with the phthalo blue. A little bit of red in there just to kick that back a little bit. That's nice. So underlying green. And I'm going to make some green stuff in there, just to kind of offset the mountain a little. More yellow. About like that. Same deal as before. With any shape that large, I really want to pull that up and get a little extra that way. Yeah, okay. You have to think a little bit about where your angles are and what that mirror shape would look like. That about like that works. So the way I have this set up now is that this mountain is essentially reflecting taller. The reflection is taller than the mountain itself. I'm doing this for the sake of perspective. That's a whole other section of painting reflections that I'm not really going to cover today, but it's important to think about your focal point, think about where your perspective lines are going to be. And in this case, because the reflection is coming towards us, that stuff's going to be larger, at least in terms of, or taller, because you're pulling that shape up and forward. It's probably not sounding super coherent, but trust me, like, perspective is important for things like reflections and shadows, and those are things you need to consider while doing this. But we're kind of just focusing on basic color and shape here, not so much the perspective side of that, because that is, again, a whole other section that would make this way more complicated, and I don't want to make it way more complicated. So same deal, corner of the brush, just throw that out a little bit there, and real fast, yellow, just the green that's left on the brush into that white. Why not? And add my highlights in, just to little indication of some extra varying color in that. Now, part of me wants to sit and do this all day, but can't do that. Just trying to get it close, basically. All right. So now you're thinking, okay, you have maybe a lot of mistakes in here. That's good. Let it be fluid. Let the water be water. You can detail all you want out of your main shape. But the water's allowed to be a little bit more distorted. Now from that point, I'm going to grab some white in my liner brush. Highly recommend getting a liner brush if you do not have one. It's like a round, but with a lot more flow. The bristles are a lot longer. Lets you work it a lot like a pencil. So I'm taking some titanium white paint, thinning it down to similar viscosity to what you might get out of a fluid. And then we can use that to create water lines. And our water lines here are going to hide our mistakes. They're going to hide that middle section that I told you not to worry about. So come right back in. And again, ideally, let your layers dry in between. Don't try to do this all at once like I am. But that water line creates. And then anything you want to hide, any little mistakes, they can become little waves, little ripples. I kind of went overboard with this peak here, so I'm going to turn that into a big ripple there. And that distortion, that little wave, becomes that extra little focal point there. No, not strictly focal point, but point of interest, I should say. And I also have another tutorial on waterfalls and water lines. All I'm doing here is just kind of a little bit of back and forth. Occasionally I'll throw a little S-curve in there. But that's pretty much it. Then closer up rocks, I'll put even a boulder line in there. I'll loop them around, ripple them around, as if it's wrapping around a circular shape. Again, I covered this. That tutorial is probably almost 10 years old now, but same technique anyway. About like that. So yeah, simple. Paint one side, paint the other side, and just replicate that. Easiest way to do that, again, is as you work, just flip your canvas over back and forth, and remember that the reflection's allowed to be distorted, and in most cases it's probably going to be. So distort, pull the shapes out more. You can push perspective a little bit. I wouldn't change the angle a whole heck of a lot, but you can absolutely pull that down. And especially if you're doing murky water, I would highly recommend painting that first and then glazing on top of it. Now we're going to do that. We're going to do an overglaze a little bit later for this. But for this second example, I want to have a little more fun. I want to take everything I just covered, but push it a little bit more and maybe make it just a little bit faster. So I want to make like a sunset color, like a red. Absolutely a red. My yellow's been sitting out for a lot of the day, so it's not going to be super wet anymore, apparently. So let me grab just a little bit more of that paint. That should work. Yeah, load that up. Let's brush out a little. Need a bit more moisture here. That's good. So I'm going to create a relatively solid, wow, okay, I've lost all my red there. It's very, pulling up the green too much in there. All right, we're going to make a nice orangish color here that we're going to use for the bulk of this particular sky. I am going to need some water. So I'm just going to layer out a nice big blob of color. No gradient really, just playing with some basic stuff with the brush, and then to some degree replicate that down below. Of course, I'm getting a lot of my greens in there because I didn't rinse my brush enough. That's all right. Now I'm leaving a section here because I'm going to put a sun in here, a nice big one. That's pretty good. All right. So from there, again, you notice I'm still using the same brush. That's what's fun about little paintings like this is you really can. You can just kind of do whatever you want to some degree. All right, so I'm taking that yellow, mix that with a big bunch of white, thin it out a little, and I'm going to make a big old sun right here. Working a little wetter than I might normally, but yeah, nice sort of faded sun, and then replicating that shape right here. Don't have to be super precise, but just doing that. And then that lower level again because it's on in the water. Just slightly with the corner of the brush, distorting it. And you can always do that when it's wet. Can't really do it when it's dry. So if you want to get those good distortions, you gotta work fast, especially with acrylics. Oils, you can just probably do it for a couple of days and still be all right. A couple of days to a couple of weeks. And everything like that. It's just nowhere near round enough the way I want it to be. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do one of them. A little sun like that. Never hurt anybody. Nice, quick, and easy one. And distort. Okay. All right. So, going to use my same dark color that I had before with a little bit of blue in it just to kick back the value a little bit. Actually, put some of that red in there too. Why not? There we go. Nice, deep reddish, bluish, whateverish color. Dark chromatic gray. All right, so for this one, I'm going to come in and let's make a tower on here. We'll a little more paint on that brush. My bristles are starting to splay. This brush is like about 4 years old now, so I'm bad at taking care of it, so we'll do that. And come down to a horizon and then match that the other way. Yeah, my sun's off a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to create a little loop. And then replicate that down below. And here I'm actually leaving a space here. So rather than coming straight dark into dark, I'm leaving that space to use as a water line without having to paint the water line. Make up maybe a little swirly into there. Boop. And this way. Forgetting my direction there. Letting that be more distorted. Not going to touch that a ton. Actually, I'm doing it a little bit maybe. I can push and pull, but again, less is more. Don't go overboard. All right, a little more water. Since I'm working so fast, I need my paint to flow tonight. I'm going to put a little rock there, a little rock here, and a real big thing right there. Everything's always easier when you paint the underlayers first. Make a little thing like that. Up and down and in. And again, I could flip this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to eyeball this because I feel like doing it that way, you get more like almost natural distortions when you're not trying to make it perfect. And slowly blend it out, leaving just a little bit of that underlying color and allowing ourselves to maybe make more mistakes, but those mistakes, well, as Bob Ross put it, are more happy accidents. So we can let the mistakes, especially on the lower side, be distortions in our reflection. Now for that one, we'll take that, dry that off. This I'll just pull down, I think, for that little bit of a subtle reflection, and pull out. This guy will go that way, pull down a little, and again, back and forth. A little bit of distortion. Not a ton, a little bit of ripple. And same deal as before, though I'm not going to grab my liner for this. I'm actually going to stick right with my flat brush. Grab some white, might even tone it down with some of that red, just so it's not quite as bright. And then water lines, ripples. As before, less is more. Don't overly blend. Don't keep trying to fix it, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to screw it up if you keep trying to fix it and trying to fix it and try to fix it and try and fix it. Make a stroke and live with it, and you'll find that in doing so, you'll create way more dynamic pieces that fit compositions, fit ideas, and impress a lot more people, that's for sure. So there we go. 2 simple ways, well, simple demos, rather, on painting reflections. Now again, I could come over here and re-highlight this and spend the rest of the evening pulling a little extra color down into my, my rocks and giving them extra shapes and things like that. As I mentioned here, I should have done this before all of this. It's not impossible to do, it just makes things a little bit more of a pain, and it's a lot less accurate. And while I did say just some distortion is nice, not all distortion all the time. But it does make for a very fun way of doing it, and as long as you're thinking about your composition in terms of this side, essentially as 2 small paintings, rather than it as a single piece, like, oh, I'm just going to paint this and then I got to paint this. No, like, you're basically making 2 paintings that reflect one another. And that's really the easiest way to look at it. And if you start thinking about it that way, you're going to be a lot better at painting those reflections in your own work. Now, I did say that we were going to sort of distort and change this water a little bit, and we are. So I'm going to grab a color that I did not shout out at the beginning because I didn't actually plan on using it. And that's Golden Smalt Hue. It's my secret weapon for making shadows and murky water and things like that, just to kick certain colors back. Highly transparent color. Dries a little differently than how it comes out of the tube, and I'm going to mix up some of my gray tone. And because this is now dry, I can now glaze with this color. And that's the idea for this, is you don't want to try and glaze while something is still wet, because you'll end up ripping the underlying paint off, and that's something that nobody ever wants. So maybe this water is not perfectly clear. Maybe it's not the Pacific Ocean. So when you can glaze a little color on top of that, now I'm just using water for this. Ideally, for a bigger piece, I might be using something like a GAC 100 or a glazing liquid, just so I'm not totally destroying my color. But it does add a little extra color, a little extra complexity to the piece itself. And you still got those reflections. And a lot of times on a piece like this, I may end up... Where did my... There it is. Lost my liner brush for a second there. After I do a layer like that to kick back that color, I will come back in with my liner and redo my my highlights, my water lines, and everything like that to be sure that those areas of color and areas of reflection and ripple can exist and still will exist in the capacity that I wanted them to in the first place. So that is just a quick look at how personally I approach painting reflections in my landscapes. Now, are there other techniques for this? Yes, absolutely. Will other artists be criticizing me in the comments? Probably. But this is how I approach it, and I think it's one of the fastest and probably the easiest way to approach painting reflections, specifically for things like lakes, waters, oceans, everything like that. It's tricky, but it's also easy. Like I mentioned before, it's really easy to overdo it, to keep wanting to blend your paint out, to make a stroke and like, that didn't work, let's fix it, let's fix it, let's fix it. Less is more almost all the time for painting. And if you can get that into your mind and really rationalize that, it can really transform the way you paint. And I really think today, for these particular examples, it's true. It's less is more. These are bolder, they stand out better, and I can guarantee you that if you do the things that I've suggested in this video, that you're going to make better paintings and paintings that are going to impress everybody around you. So if you enjoyed this, learned something, or just want to help support the channel, hit the like button. Let me know your thoughts and comments below. Check me out on social links in the description box. Check out more of my content. I have got tons of acrylic painting tutorials that are easily accessible for just about anybody at any skill level. So yeah, that's all. I think that's all I have to say today. Keep on creating. Try this one out for yourself. And this has been from Cinder Studios. I will see you guys next time. Man, did I mess that ending up. Wow. Yeah.